So we're gonna hit our 2 o'clock close date right on the money, and because last but not least, and very direct, Harold Feld will come to the podium and speak on behalf of the Media Access Project, where he's been a leader in these debates about public interest issues for many years. Harold?
Thank you. It always amazes me how Kevin Martin can be so incredibly smart and care about what I think are the right things and still come up with solutions with which I so dramatically disagree. And I have to say that this is really a case where I do believe that the chairman is sincere when he says he wants to address competition problems, because the easiest thing to have done here would have been to have done nothing. They could have not gone forward with a further notice in April. They wouldn't have to have this nod to open access that the incumbents are so vociferously resisting. So I am, on the one hand, have to applaud Martin for the leadership he has shown and the willingness to have this kind of a public debate. On the other hand, Janice was absolutely right when she said half a loaf is worse than no loaf in this case. The worst thing that happens here is where we go part of the way and don't go all the way because it doesn't seem politically feasible. We lack the political courage. We can't get two other commissioners to go along with the right solution to be willing to do something that will actually make a difference on the problems that have been identified, which are the public safety issues of having interoperable communication, and getting somebody to build out that network so that it actually happens. The problem of wireless card phone network attachment, whatever you want to talk about, the iPhone problem, and the very real problem of the broadband duopoly and the continuing quest for the third pipe. And the problem is that what has been put out here right now doesn't actually solve any of these problems. It doesn't do a thing for a third pipe, and nobody even pretends that it would. Real open access, what Gigi described earlier, what I'd like to call the 4 opens as opposed to the 4 freedoms that the FCC adopted in 2005 for wireline broadband. For Spectrum here we've got the 4 opens, the open devices, open applications on the devices, open services through the wireless network, and open wholesale on the network itself. These are things that can bring in a real third pipe to the home, either by attracting new bidders or in the aftermarket, allowing new ISPs to come together in a wholesale market and put together enough spectrum to be the third pipe, even if they didn't win the licenses. But without the open wholesale that has been proposed, we are not going to see new parties interested in bidding, as you've heard here, and we're not going to have the capacity afterwards to see a new provider emerge. Open access as defined by Martin, which is just this open device and network attachment, probably doesn't even solve the iPhone problem. Stifel-Nicholas circulated a two-page summary yesterday in which they explained the limitations that are being imposed by having this be on just one block in this one band and not applicable in other bands probably doesn't do enough for device manufacturers. It's too easy for the incumbents, if they win, to tie this in with other spectrum, to delay it with standards fights, to drag their heels in the way that they really know how, to keep this from even having the pro-competitive effect on devices that Martin sees as desirable. So it's not even going to solve the problem that he thinks it's going to solve. I think it's a nice thing to do. I think the principle of wireless card phone is important, so I'd rather have it than not have it, but it's not going to actually solve the problem, and we shouldn't pretend that it does. Finally, taking open access out of the E block, now I understand called the D block, is not going to help public safety. I understand there's been a lot of concern about security, and I appreciate the natural and appropriate conservative nature of the public safety community in this regard, because when people's lives are on the line, that is a hell of a time to be experimenting with new technologies. And so security concerns need to be taken seriously. But the fact is that you have some well-established bidders like Northrop Grumman saying, yeah, we could build this and it wouldn't present a problem. And you have to consider the problems that you're facing now with the rules as we understand them, which is, number one, If you were worried before that this was rigged as a bid for Frontline and you were going to be stuck dealing with just one company, Frontline, it's now rigged as a bid for the incumbents because nobody else is going to show up to bid against them on this national license. So you're still going to have it's rigged for only one company to come in and win it, and you'll be locked into agreements. I also invite public safety to consider that a network that is built by somebody who's in the retail business will not be customized for your use. It will be customized for their use. A wholesaler wants to build a plain vanilla network so that you can maximize the number of people you're leasing to, and that would give public safety an enormous advantage in terms of the applications and the things that it wants to run. If AT&T or Verizon or any of the other incumbents build this network, they are going to build it primarily with their commercial services in mind, and the network will be customized to those commercial services. So if you guys want to have unlimited text messaging, that'll be great for you, but if you have other things in mind, you might have problems. The final thought, we've heard people talk about the revenue issues here, and I just want to toss out a couple of things. Number one, we have a real problem in spectrum public policy, which I refer to as auction revenues are the crack cocaine of public policy. And this has really become one of the great tragedies of how we do this, because all the incumbents have to do is say, we might not show up at bid, and suddenly there is this stampede of folks who have become utterly dependent on the revenue, who are saying, don't touch anything, don't do anything, leave it the way the incumbents want, or they're not going to show up to bid. But as Gigi pointed out, it's actually the other way around. When we have rules that level the playing field for bidding, when we have rules that encourage new entrants to show up, auction revenues go up. Let me put a little flesh on that. The last auction we had with spectrum caps and encumbered type spectrums back in 2000, the next wave resale auction, ultimately voided by the Supreme Court, but just looking at the auction revenue itself, was $4 per megahertz pop. Megahertz pop is the standard way we measure the revenue. That's in short, it's the population divided by the licensed megahertz. But it's the standard. $4 per megahertz pop in 2000 in the last encumbered auction. The AWS auction, which the incumbents point to as so wildly and amazingly successful that we should do exactly the same thing over and over again, 45 cents per megahertz pop. That's almost 1/10 of the revenue on a megahertz pop base when you do it the way the incumbents want, rather than trying to encourage new people to come in and bid. So in conclusion, there's been a lot of talk about auction rigging and whether we're rigging this for just one company. I'd like to suggest that there is serious auction rigging going on, and it is by the incumbents who are trying to stampede us into using the same rules that let them win the major licenses at cheap prices every time. This was the conclusion for the Center of American Progress when it did a 10-year longitudinal study of auction revenues last year. This was the conclusion of New America Foundation, which released 2 studies that focused specifically on the AWS auction. I will point out that those 2 studies of the AWS auction, which showed, using the methodology that was developed by Peter Crampton and his partner Jesse Schwartz and has been taken as the gold standard in academia, that there was serious retaliatory bidding, signaling, and collusion, which allowed bidders to manipulate the auction, drive out new entrants, and drive down revenue. Now, if you're an incumbent, that works out pretty well. Comcast boasted in a press release to its shareholders that it had acquired a national footprint at attractive prices, especially given the size of the spectrum, the quality of the spectrum, and the fact that spectrum like this does not come on the market too often. So as we are looking at this and asking who's rigging the auction for what, I think we ought to ask whether we should be maximizing the value to Comcast shareholders, to AT&T shareholders, to Verizon shareholders, or whether we should be looking to maximize the value of this to the public. Thank you.